There's something wrong with the deer in my town. Part 2 of 3. By Redditor Riot Hyena. I've got good news and bad news. I'll lead with the bad. Bad news is, the fucking deer from last night broke my kitchen window. Good news is, I'm the proud new owner of a 12 gauge from Rob's gun store. Story is, the deer left my window after I closed the blinds in its face. It took every ounce of bravery I have to get that close to the fucking thing while it was watching me like a hawk, with all the hate and malice in its eyes, but I managed it. I don't think it moved immediately, because I sat down to write yesterday's post and didn't hear a peep from it outside for at least an hour. Then I heard it pacing around my house like it was looking for a way in. It's cold as hell, so all my doors and windows were shut, but I could hear it huffing as it paced the walls, and heard its hooves thud across my porch. I guess it must have gotten sick of looking for a peaceful way in, because the next thing I knew I heard the window to my kitchen explode in the other room. I grabbed a bat and ran into the kitchen only to see the deer half hanging in and out of the window. All that broken glass must have cut it bad, because the whole kitchen smelled like pennies and soil. The deer locked eyes with me and it let out this long and horrible howl. I've never heard a deer make a noise like that before. You ever been riverboating or camping or what have you, and in the serene distance, you hear the haunting sound of an elk's call billow through the air? Yeah, like that, but coming from a white-tailed doe hanging out of my kitchen window at 4:30 in the morning. I must have reacted by pure instinct. I didn't even think, I just swung that bat into the deer's face like I was trying to take its head off. I heard the nauseating crack of bone breaking, and for a brief moment, the normal, dumb fear returned to the deer's eyes as it fell backwards out of the window. Then it got up and scampered off, bounding over my backyard fence. I saw the glass glittering in its chest and belly as it leaped away. I got some lights on as soon as I saw it disappear over the fence. The glass must have done more damage than I saw at first. There was blood everywhere. Maybe it hit an artery or something, because the blood had poured down the window and collected about an inch deep in my kitchen sink. There was a trail of it all the way to the fence and over it. My neighbor Scott came over to investigate through the gate between our yards, and he froze halfway to my back door. I could hear him through the broken window, muttering a prayer before he started calling for me. Scott's a good old boy. He's Rob's son, actually. We've known each other as acquaintances for most of our lives, but we only really became friends when I moved into the house next door to his. He's got a bleeding heart for animals, and he's a rambunctious goofball that can put a smile on even the meanest son of a bitch. He'll do just about anything if it means helping out. He volunteered to help me clean up as much of the glass as we could for the night. We wiped up some of the blood and rinsed most of it out of my sink. I told him I'd get the bleach out and sanitize the rest of it when it was daylight. When we'd just about finished getting the mess up and patching a tarp over the window so the rain don't get in, we cracked open a couple of beers and sat on the porch in silence, staring at the streak of blood the deer left on my back fence when it had jumped over. After a few minutes, he'd asked quieter than I knew he could, "Did you hear it howl?" I didn't know how to answer. I mean, yes, of course I fucking did. It was 5 feet from my face when it was making that horrible noise. I sat in silence trying to formulate a response. All I could think about was that haunting sound echoing in my head. I guess I took too long because Scott stood up, stretched, and changed the subject. "You know that pregnant calico I've been fostering? She had her kittens a few weeks ago. You wanna see?" I hung out at Scott's for a bit. It was therapeutic, I guess, to handle some delicate little kittens after having to smack Bambi in the face with a metal bat. Made me feel slightly less like the real monster here. The kittens were pretty cute. Scott let me have one of them. Well, 2. One's for me, since my house was getting too quiet anyway. The other one's for Matt Miller, the teenager who saw a deer eat part of his old cat. I don't know if it's too soon, or faux pas to gift a cat, but screw it. I'd have given you cat tax, but honestly I forgot my phone in my bedroom in all the chaos, so I'll just describe them. She had 3 little ones. She's a calico apparently, them black and orange and white kinda splotchy ones. The only boy I took for myself. He was mostly black, with some splotches of orange and white paws. I called him Boots. The other two little ones, the girls, were total opposites of each other. One was all white with one orange splotch covering one ear and one black splotch covering the other ear. I picked that one out for Matt. The other girl was almost all black, with a big splotch of white over her eye, and one white paw. Scott told me a family in town had already picked her out for a Christmas gift for their girl. Lucky kid. I asked Scott to keep an eye on my place cause I had some errands to run. He agreed, cause of course he would. First order of business was the gun store. I left Matt's kitten in a bundle of towels on my driver's seat when I went into Rob's. He's kind of a crotchety old bastard, but he's got a good heart in there somewhere, under all the piss and vinegar. I don't think he would have been able to raise a guy like Scott otherwise. Scott must have let him know about what happened this morning, because as soon as I walked in the door, Rob went off yelling about how he hates this chupacabra skinwalker Sasquatch fucking deer bullshit and how he'd give me a premium price on a hefty 12 gauge if I promised to. Put that son of a bitch down next time it decided to make a new hole in your house. Someone in the comments on my last post suggested modifying some 12 gauge shells with sage ash and hardwood ash. He said he was native, and it would help if the deer have a spiritual infection. I'm not a very spiritual person, and I don't know shit about First Nations people, but I feel like if a native guy tells you to put sage ash in your shotgun shells, you do it. I had Rob help me with the special shells. He looked at me like I was losing my marbles, but when I told him some dude online said the lead will kill the normal and the ash will kill the rest, he shrugged and said good enough for me. Yeah, me too, Rob. Me too. The trip to the Millers was a little nerve-wracking, considering a deer did a nosedive into Miriam's windshield on the only road into their homestead. But thankfully it was an uneventful drive, except for when the kitten got under the pedals. Don't drive with loose tiny animals in your car, folks. When I got there, Miriam was having her husband and Matt string up their Christmas lights around a tree out front. When I walked up with a mewling kitten, Matt froze. All I did was hand the squirming little thing over and tell him it's yours, from Scott's Calico, and he burst into tears. It's weird seeing a 15-year-old boy cry like that. It's a different kind of heart-wrenching. Miriam brought us all inside her kitchen for some cocoa, and sent Matt to go sit by the fire cause she reckoned the kitten must be cold. I'm pretty sure she was just keeping him out of earshot, because as soon as he left the room, she asked, "You believe Matt, don't you?" I told her course I do, because look at him. I think she understood what I was getting at. She put a single, frail hand on my arm and told me please don't be a fool. The look in her eyes made me think she understood just a little more than I do about all this. I asked her what she meant, and she suddenly couldn't meet my eyes and watched her hands instead, like making cocoa required so much focus. She started some idle conversation about how proud of me my dad would be if he were still here, and how nice it was I brought the cat over for Matt. You're nothing like your mother, dear. Your father's soul is at peace knowing that. Since that probably doesn't make sense to you, here's some backstory on me. Specifically, my name is Lucas. I grew up with a single dad, which is something me and Scott share. Both of our moms were chased out of town with a couple of other women 20 years ago when me and Scott were 6 and 7. I never heard much about it because my dad hated talking about her. I got the impression they must have gotten into drugs or hurt somebody or something, because whenever their names were spoken, someone would spit on the ground. And nobody would speak any more about them. I just asked her, "You knew my mother?" She said something about how everybody did, in some way or another, but none of those ways were good. It was a good thing, they did. A real good thing. By chasing those girls out. I was pretty confused because all this talk about my mother came out of nowhere, but I was pretty grateful to hear at least something. Like I said, nobody had ever answered my questions about her. Especially not my dad. Miriam went to sit down at her little dining nook and invited me to sit with her. She said she can't stand for too long, after the accident with the deer, because she gets too dizzy and faints. Mr. Miller came back inside after I talked to Miriam about how she's doing for a little while. He came over to sit with us at the table, shuffled his hands together, and did that old man thing where he works himself up to speak about something difficult. My stomach dropped. Miriam nodded at him and suddenly, her cocoa was fascinating again. "Son, How much do you know about your mother? I told him that I knew she was chased off 20 years ago, but that's about it. Everyone hates her, etc. A few moments of silence went by before Mr. Miller spoke. He told me my mother was in town this summer. Just that sentence struck me cold. Apparently, she was one of the missing out-of-towner hikers the summer search party found this year, but he wouldn't say why nobody told me this. He just said something about how she'd been with the deer. She got sent straight back out of town. When he said that, Miriam choked up and left the table and the room. Obviously, I had 1,000 questions. Why didn't anyone tell me this? Can he tell me why she was chased out? What the hell was she doing with the deer? He gave me a withering sigh like he regretted saying anything at all and told me that Miriam. And in fact a lot of people in town made a promise to my dad that they'd never tell me anything about it. It was hard for most of them to even think about, let alone tell a child. But he thought I had a right to know she'd been here, especially with how she stirred them up again. After that, he stood up, apologized for saying anything, and then followed Miriam, shutting the door behind him. I left. I just drove around and eventually parked in a random parking lot to sit and think. I'd asked my father about my mother 1,000 times, but he carried the story to his grave. He'd only tell me she wasn't right and wouldn't elaborate with any other words than that. My father lived and died in the forest. He breathed the forest. He was a forest ranger, through and through. His ranger buddies are still in the service. I think I'll go to them for answers. Should I take Scott? Should I tell him? Was his mom there, too? The rest of the women? What the fuck does she'd been with the deer mean? What the hell? I'm a fucking mess. I think I should just go home and follow up on this tomorrow after I get some sleep. I've been up since 3 anyway. Let me know what you guys think I should do and if you have any theories. I'll post another update when I can.